All right, welcome to the green economy, but basically this will be the discussion panel. We are heading into one of the most tremendous discussions regarding sustainable development, but basically coming to you live from Smart 24 TV, plot 42, Nile Avenue. So to everyone hooked in, a great welcome to the show. The Conference of the Parties will be one of the biggest areas of discussion heading into this specific program, and then later on, we shall be engaging with some of the experts. When you look at the ongoing developments as far as renewable energy is concerned, the green economy, the blue economy, one crossing factor cuts across sustainability, cutting the pollution load, pushing for net zero. And then heading from Sharm el-Sheikh, which was Egypt last year, to what we have right now, that's in Dubai, Expo City, United Arab Emirates, where they say, most of the people, that Dubai bakes in sunlight. There is a big conversation ongoing. The Conference of the Parties, the 28th edition. So many things are ongoing as far as climate justice is concerned. The global economies have come together to deliberate on the way forward, pushing for Agenda 2040, and then the streamlining factors as far as the Conference of the Parties initially had to put into place. When you look at the Kyoto Protocol, when you look at some other developments, in Iran we had the Ramsar Convention pushing for conservation of the different areas. So many things are ongoing, and when you look at Uganda's position as far as Conference of the Parties is concerned, it has a spectacular development pushing for clean cooking. And most interestingly, today there was something special. When you look at the different developments that were ongoing in Dubai, and basically the president's meetings, we had a presentation from the ministry, rather the office of the prime minister herself, on the global coalition for clean cooking. So electrifying clean cooking is one of the biggest elements. So to start with, like I said, so many things are ongoing, but most importantly, let's start from the primary area, whereby when you look at COP27, COP27 that was in Sharm, we had something to do with the least developed countries that are so hit by the climate change, pushing for or trying to get something in return. That's the least developed countries fund. And then at the same time, we have the special climate change fund. Two areas whereby the Green Environment Facility has to play a role. And basically, that's one of the biggest funding areas when it comes to financing developments that push for sustainable development, conservation of the ecosystem areas. So GEF register the development. Most importantly, when you look at the biggest players in the economy, we had USA, among other countries that included the likes of Belgium, Norway, among others, putting forward respective funding to push one of the biggest developments as far as clean energy utilization is concerned, as far as climate damage compensation is concerned, and at the same time, to understand how the least developed countries can cope with the changes. When you look at Africa, and to start from Uganda, for instance, the riverine communities, when you talk about the Kafu area, Masindi, when you talk about the Elgon Ranges, these areas are so prone to the impacts of climate change. Erratic rains, and then we have mudslides, and a lot more other setbacks that come across. So when you look at the Kafu region or Kafu area, the riverine community is sinking. And what's at stake? We have the infrastructure, transport, we have things to do with agriculture, the crops submerged. Different crops, from maize to the staple food crops, talk about potatoes, among other things. So they're all submerged. The households themselves, the same thing is happening. When you talk about the mountain areas, Elgon, Rwenzori, the same thing is happening. If it's not mudslides, the riverbanks are bursting. So crucial areas. And on a broader scale, when you look at Tanzania, just recently, the Jangwani area, Dar es Salaam, was submerged, flooding, erratic rains. So patterns tending towards climate change. And at the same time, when you look at North Africa, Ghana, we had the biggest hit on the, at the top of Africa, Libya. So many things were destroyed, including the dams that are so responsible for the biggest element that we need, that's energy. So those are all areas. When you look at the LDCF, that's the Low Developed Countries Fund, something special came up. You're looking at 141.74 million US dollars that has been announced as contribution from major players. Germany, like I said before, Norway, Spain, Sweden, and then the United Kingdom, plus Belgium, Canada, and France. So this will be so crucial in enabling countries such as Uganda and Africa at large. You're talking about countries that have a limited or small pollution load, but then facing the biggest impact for many reasons. The national budgets cannot fund that enough to cater for areas regarding conservation, regarding climate justice, and all that. So those are paramount areas whereby Africa will be so happy to link into this stream of funds to push for climate justice. And when we still talk about such funding, that will be responsibly pushed forward by the the Global Environment Facility. Locally, we have players that have benefited from such initiatives. And when you look at even the Local Development Bank, that's UDB, one of the areas that is tended towards climate financing, and of course they have a special facility for that, the Green Climate Finance. So one of the contributors is the Global Environment Facility. So funds from them will be so crucial in implementing so many sustainable development initiatives, but tended towards conserving the environment, tended towards adaptation of the impact of climate change. So, like I said, locally, we have a number of players. When you look at the Ramsar Convention, in Uganda, we tapped into it. So people that are into the conservation space, when you look at Mabamba, that's one of the biggest Ramsar sites locally, some of the funding pushing for conservation of such key ecosystem areas, we talk about funding from the GEF. So it will be so crucial. And specifically, that's one of the biggest developments at the ongoing Conference of the Parties. And we're talking about the 28th Conference of the Parties. So away from that, we still had a mass involvement as Uganda. We have the Minister of Energy up there, and then still we have the Minister of Water and Environment. And at the same time, we have a catalog of stakeholders that are on the conference or attending the conference. Why? It's the global discourse regarding climate change. We're talking about impact, adaptation, and all that. But then to delve you into insight of what exactly the 28th Conference of the Party is all about, and most importantly, when it comes to Uganda, we had the presentation from our Honorable Prime Minister, Robin Anabanja. And one of the key areas that she highlighted was in regard to e-cooking. But first, before that, let's take a look at one of the keyest areas. We had primarily, before we headed into Conference of the Parties, the Minister of Energy, and basically Uganda together with Mazda, which is one of the entities, biggest entities as far as renewable energy utilization and promotion is concerned, had an agreement with Uganda. Why? To push renewable energy. So develop the infrastructure, develop the initiatives, and then mainstream uptake of renewable energy. But that called for development of the necessary infrastructure. Because you are looking at 2040 agenda, which calls for so much megawatts, transcending from what you have locally or at the moment to something bigger to cater for the multi-sectoral initiatives. We're talking about the industry, we're talking about transport. Recently, we had something to do with the e-mobility, and one of the biggest conversations at Trek 23 was in regard to e-mobility. So first, let's take a look at what the collaboration or the understanding between Uganda and Mazda means in regard to mainstreaming uptake of clean and renewable energy.
This roadmap is following up on the joint development agreement that we signed with Mazda to develop 1,000 megawatts of solar power in Uganda. But they cannot begin the development of all the 1,000 because it will require, first of all, to do the grid study, to see whether our national grid can take on all the 1,000 megawatts. So today we have, the Prime Minister has witnessed the roadmap for the first 150 megawatts. But I'm also happy to appreciate the offer that has been done by Mazda to help us on the study to know how the grid is going to be ready to take on whatever power that we are going to be generating, not only for the Mazda project, but for the entire country. You know, Uganda recently came up with a study and an energy strategy to increase our generation capacity from 2,000 to 52,000 megawatts. The study on the grid behavior is very critical. So Uganda is thankful to Mazda for this offer, and that means we are going to have a saving, but we are also going to fast track our generation development. So we are appreciating, and we wish you well. Let's go back home and begin by seeing the land being offered by end of this month of December. Government of Uganda is going to deliver the land to Mazda, where the project is going to take place.
All right, we shall be anticipating a lot in regard to the collaboration between the government of Uganda and then Mazda. We're talking about Dubai or the United Arab Emirates being one of the biggest players in renewable energy uptake. When you look at their transition from what they were, or from where they were so many years ago, they pushed for one of the biggest areas, that's solar energy. From 2011, developments have been ongoing. So when you look at the different developments regarding clean energy, renewable energy uptake, from one of the biggest solar parks situated in one location, to so many things regarding innovation. They have an innovation center and so many other things. So there will be so much to anticipate from this collaboration. But most importantly, let's have a look into what exactly the collaboration means for Mazda's initiatives. We're talking about one of the biggest players as far as
the extraordinary relationship between two presidents, two great leaders, our president and Uganda's president. And from there, we started our relationship to develop, like the Honorable Minister highlighted, the joint development agreement for 1,000 megawatt or 1 gigawatt. And today is a major milestone moving forward the progress of that JDA. And hopefully, like the Prime Minister has highlighted, this is a very important step. And we at Masdar, who are working closely with Uganda Ministry of Energy, are committed to develop this project as per the timelines. And we, of course, are also happy to provide support from a technical aspect related to the grid of the country. Thank you.
All right, coming into this very conversation, as of today, we had so many developments ongoing at the Conference of the Parties, the 28th Conference. So from initiatives regarding the global coalition on eco-king, we had something special as well called the global stocktake. So in regard to understanding the challenge at hand for the different parties, global economies, when you look at the United Nations Framework Convention on climate change, we have different parties. Annex 1 parties basically pulls into play the developed countries, and they are the most industrialized countries. So when you look at their pollution law, their burden is a lot enormous. So the portfolio is very big. When it comes to the non-Annex 1 parties, where Africa falls, you talk about countries in Southeast Asia, among other countries, and then basically still in South America. So many developing countries fall into non-Annex 1 parties. So when you look at our pollution load, it isn't that quite big because you're looking at less than 3%, actually less than 4% pollution load, contributed by the different sectors, from transport, the industry, and when you talk about the industry, you have the cement industry, the steel industry, which are considered to be some of the most biggest pollutants, and then energy-intensive sectors. So from all those sectors, the industry, transport, agriculture, human activity, Africa is still looking at less than 4% pollution load. And then the different countries are coming up with NDCs. Those are the nationally determined contributions. But what are they running after? We are looking at adaptation, mitigation, and then some other mechanisms that will promote sustainable development, but basically through conservation of the ecosystem, the biodiversity. So the stocktake, global economies looking at the bigger picture. What's the burden at hand? We are looking at initiatives whereby their burden has to be paid for when you talk about the carbon trading and then the carbon markets. Key initiatives whereby different mechanisms have to be considered to mitigate or rather cut down the pollution load. Net zero, one of the driving factors. What can we achieve in the long run if you are to sustain development over time? But then utilizing some of the biggest resources, a push away from fossils, oil, we are talking about natural gas, we are talking about coal. South Africa is one of the biggest users locally. So would you be telling them to shift from coal? What would be the next alternative? So all those are initiatives. But first, before we move further, let's take a look at what the global stocktake basically covers as far as initiatives to mitigate climate damage is concerned, as far as financing is needed, and then the different solutions to encounter the crisis at hand.
Aimed climate action. Incremental action is insufficient to drive the transformation towards low-emission, resilient societies. Leaders must chart a clear, ambitious path forward to reach the goals and objectives of the Paris Agreement while leaving no one behind.
All right, hopefully you had an insight into exactly what the stocktake entails, looking at mechanisms cutting across from adaptation to mitigation, and what governments across the globe, Africa, Asia, Europe, need to put into consideration to push net zero. We are looking at limiting global warming, which is one of the driving factors for climate change. When you look at the developed countries, Canada, USA, they always deal with wildfires during certain periods. So from the wildfires to rising sea levels, that cut across for coastal communities. When you talk about Kenya and Tanzania, something is happening. That's why Dar es Salaam is submerging. When you talk about Libya, the same thing is happening. That's why Dana was hit by one of the biggest storms or floods you talk about. So when you look at this entire crisis, it's one of the driving factors for what we are pushing for, the global conversation regarding sustainable development, regarding environmental protection, regarding climate justice. So those are some of the elements that are rather key discussion or topical areas that are ongoing at the the Conference of the Parties, the 28th conference. And then besides that, we still had something really interesting. Among the discussions that are ongoing, had something regarding acceleration of green demand of heavy emitting sectors. And when you talk about heavy emitting sectors, earlier on I mentioned something to do with some of the biggest sectors. When you talk about the cement industry, when you talk about the steel industry, so critical towards development, but then they have a burden to really fix the pollution load. That's why when you look at the cement industry, they're looking into areas of limiting the offsets of the utilization of limestone, among other elements. That's why the clinker factor comes in. Can there be any other alternatives to the clinker, clinker and then limestone? So that's why the other alternatives such as fly ash come in, slag, among other elements. And then when you look at the steel industry, something of the sort is still in place. When you look at the biggest players locally, Tembo, Roofings, they have things to do with mitigating the impact. Things to do with how do you utilize the red oxide later on after the production. So those are big areas whereby we are looking into acceleration of the green energy demand. How can we integrate efficient energy utilization into key sectors? And then still, we had something to do with the high-level roundtable on renewables and energy efficiency. Key topical discussions at the Conference of the Parties. But then most importantly, something that really brings us onto the conversation there and then is a conversation regarding electric cooking. When you look at the Conference of the Parties, earlier on we had a session regarding how to electrify cooking, considered one of the just transitions towards net zero. So locally, it will be a very big conversation, and we have players that are pushing for that. The Ministry of Energy is in there with so many stakeholders. When you look at UNREA, when you look at UZEA, that's the Uganda Solar Energy Association. When you look at CREEC, among other big players, this is a renewable energy sector, so pivotal to them, but not only to them, even to Uganda. So what exactly happened at the Conference of the Parties today, where we had our Prime Minister, Robin Anabanja, make a presentation? She told us, she in fact elaborated or highlighted what Uganda's position is. When you look at the Ministry of Energy, rather environment, they are pushing for that. So first, let's take a look at what Uganda's position is in the eyes of the Prime Minister. What exactly did she tell us? We are looking at the National E-Cooking Strategy, accelerating e-cooking solutions from 1% to 38% by 2030. So how exactly can we push for the 2030 agenda? Locally, we have so many players, or rather, the biggest communities and a bigger rural community in Uganda relies on biomass. And when we talk about biomass, we are looking at firewood, we are looking at charcoal, which is so predominant in urban areas. Sorry, Kampala, Jinja, Arua, Gulu, among other areas, predominantly used as an energy source for cooking. So how best can we push for that? But first, let's take a look at what the Prime Minister had to present to the global community regarding our just transition towards clean energy utilization.
Uganda's Vision 2040 aims to create access to clean, affordable, and reliable energy. My government shall require 481 megawatts by the year 2040. Access to national grid is envisioned to significantly increase by 80% by the year 2040. The required capacity will be generated from hydropower, geothermal, nuclear, solar, and biomass, among others. The government of Uganda, under its National Development Plan, has a target to reduce the share of biomass energy from 89% to almost 50% by the year 2025, and to 100% by the year 2040.
All right, that was the very first bit of presentation by the Prime Minister. So earlier on I mentioned about what exactly the local community looks like when it comes to energy consumption. The biggest percentage, over 70%, energy sources are tended towards biomass. We're talking about charcoal for household consumption, and even institutions. Different people use charcoal, firewood at the same time, schools, among other institutions. So the question usually is, how possible is it? We are looking at the energy demand. In sub-Saharan Africa, we are looking at limited access to electricity. Most rural communities, predominant in very many countries such as Uganda, cannot access electricity. Why? Primarily because even the infrastructure that they have cannot be, they don't meet the standards that are needed to electrify their homes, being connected to the grid. So the questions regarding the energy access is very big. But most importantly, when you look at the transition, it's calling for utilization of renewable energy. That's why solar comes in, and other developments regarding wind, which is some other area quite interesting that maybe we shall have to talk about later on. But when you look at the local energy portfolio, it's growing big. Earlier on, we had something to do with the collaboration between Uganda and Mazda. What are they bringing on board? It's the wind, rather solar energy. So solar, we are looking at geothermal, we are looking at the predominant hydro. All will be important towards the push for electric cooking, for instance, which is one of the areas that we need to consider for the just transition from the highly carbon dominant sectors to low carbon sectors. So many questions regarding that. But before we head into the break, let's first look at the second presentation that the Honorable Prime Minister had to present to the global community as far as Uganda's position and transition is towards limiting reliance on unclean energy.
To address this issue, the government of Uganda has developed a national e-cooking strategy that is aimed at accelerating adoption of e-cooking solutions from the current 1% to 38% by the year 2030. This includes all grid-connected households and institutions, as well as off-grid users, such as refugee host communities. My country's e-cooking strategy will support triple achievements in increasing the per capita consumption of electricity, increasing clean cooking access, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions emanating from the use of traditional biomass fuels.
All right. Access and affordability will be so crucial elements in the push for utilization of electricity for areas or sectors such as cooking. So as we head into the break, when we come back, the e-cooking conversation will get even bigger because we shall be getting to interact with one of the biggest players in the industry, that's UNAC. And I'll be in conversation with Sarah Babiri, who is specifically the project manager at Uganda National Alliance for Clean Cooking, one of the biggest areas that we anticipate will be leading us into the transition together with the Minister of Energy, and most importantly, there is an e-cooking strategy. So that conversation will be coming later on. But first,